Hey everybody, welcome to Psychic Stories. I'm Lisa Campion. It's so good to be here with you again. Today we have a really extraordinary story to share. It's a journey that it's just remarkable. I have to say I was in like tears reading about this. But our guest today is Reverend Peter Panagore, and he experienced something that really few people ever do, that a near-death experience. So I'll let him tell you more about what happened. But you know, that he died, and when he came back, he had quite the story to tell, and spent years sharing this story and the wisdom that it brought him. He is the author of a couple of best-selling books: Heaven is Beautiful, soon to be a film. Congratulations. And 2 Minutes for God. And today he's joining us to explore this near-death experience and the profound spiritual truths that he discovered on the other side. So get ready for a conversation that will take you beyond the ordinary to the very heart of life's greatest mysteries. So welcome to the show.
Oh, wow. Thanks for having me, Lisa. Appreciate the introduction.
Yeah. So tell us what happened, Peter. What happened to you?
Well, in brief, because it unfolded over 24 hours, and I'll give you a little lead into it, and then I'll get right to the what happened to when I died. I was ice climbing in Alberta, Canada in March of 1980. This is my first ice climb, but I'd been mountaineering a whole bunch in my life and backcountry skiing, and I was an outdoor winter person, having been in Boy Scouts. We winter camped every year all the time. And then I expanded that into private wilderness experiences that I was frequently taking. But this particular trip, we did a 10-day snow cave backcountry ski into the Canadian Rocky Mountains and topped it off with a 1-day ice climb. Though my partner Tim was a certified lead climber on ice, I was a novice on ice, but I was a mountain goat. And so we were very confident. I was so confident that I made a choice that ultimately killed me and would have killed Tim. I chose to climb without all of the proper equipment that I needed. I climbed with an axe and a hammer instead of two axes, which meant that my climb was significantly slower than it should have been, and I was twice as exhausted, twice as fast, because I had to continue to grip this little tiny hammer and my swing was shorter. All of this set us up for reaching the top of our three-pitch climb at sunset when we should have been on the bottom at that point. The sun dropped, the temperature dropped with it about 30 degrees. We had three pitches to get down in the dark on the ice in a very isolated place by ourselves. And we knew immediately when the sun went down, and we knew before the sun went down, that we were in a grave, and I mean that word, a grave situation, because you have to go up when you're climbing. You can't just turn around and go down. It's not like backpacking or hiking on a trail somewhere. You can't just turn around. You have to go the way you're going. And we had to traverse across the ice and make these three pitch rappels in the dark, roped to each other while freezing, with frostbite advancing, hypothermia deepening. Hypothermia is a system-wide suffering that involves the shutting down of cognitive functions, the loss of mobility, the loss of coordination, the loss of reason. And by the time we reached the final rappel, it had so advanced. I had the fire in my feet where my feet were freezing all night. I still have all my digits, but I have damage everywhere. And by the time we reached this final pitch, my the burn of the freezing had ceased and gone. The nerves had numbed.
That's never a good sign.
It was bad. And I was on the ski patrol at Bridger Bowl in Montana, and we had just had this big refresher course on hypothermia and frostbite. So I was very up on what was going on. But that didn't really help me, except for to know that tick tock time was running out. So we get to this final pitch, and we were standing on a ledge the size of a boardroom table with a wall of rock in front of us and iron pins epoxied into the mountain with rings, carabiners attached, and strapped to our harnesses. So this is the first time all night that we were actually safe from falling, as this was the top of the practice rappel where people would climb up and then rappel down from. And so we're clipped into this place, and I've got the rope, and I tie the rope to my harness, and I take the other end of the rope and I throw it out around the corner of this crag and I yank it and it gets stuck on the first pull 3 inches and it's jammed in some kind of rock overlay. I don't know what happened to it. I couldn't see it. And that meant that we couldn't go up or couldn't go down. And I'm telling this story now very dispassionately, but I was terrified. I was terrified. I knew what was coming. My brain was driving itself forward, sort of independent of my thinking. I had reached this state inside myself where my early mammalian or reptilian brain took over and survival was the only thing that I was. I became this being to survive. I was expending no extraneous energy. I wasn't talking to Tim because speaking was difficult anyway because my tongue was freezing and my lips were freezing and my eyes were freezing. The back of my eyeballs I could feel them because they were freezing. The whole thing was a terrifying, terrible push against time as our energy levels dropped, as we consumed whatever energy we had left, as the temperature continued to drop, as time ticked on, as the cold began to penetrate, it was like super dramatic. And then the rope got stuck, and I realized that I wasn't going to get out of this thing, and I gave up. And when I gave up, I had this peace kind of come over me, where of acceptance of the situation that I'm in, and I let my mind think about my parents and God and realized that I just wasn't going to get out of this thing. And I began to fall asleep, which is the last stage. And this last time that I fell asleep, as I fell asleep, the as the curtain of darkness dropped, I had this like, wow, this is really weird because I'd been having this curtain drop, and this time the curtain wasn't a curtain, it was a spotlight. It was like tunnel vision, and the tunnel vision got tighter and tighter and tighter. And as it got to the edge and closed, I was thinking, well, this is weird. I've never experienced this kind of falling asleep before. And as it closed to darkness, I didn't fall asleep. I awoke, and my awakening, I sort of came forward out of my body, but I was still touching my body, and I was looking into this deep, dark void, this darkness that had depth to it. It had depth to it because instantaneously there was this tiny speck of light that appeared at this great distance that then rushed toward me and communicated directly to me telepathically, no language, that I was going with this entity. And I thought, I don't know what's going on. I'm not going anywhere. And so I took this willpower and I kind of put up a shield against this entity that was rushing toward me. And it just figuratively knocked the shield aside and snatched me, one whoop, and I'm no resistance. I had no power. And it enfolded me inside itself. And as it enfolded me inside itself, uh, I know we only have a half an hour, and I'm gonna tell the first part of the story and cut to some important parts. But during this particular part, I experienced superposition. I was inside of this entity, and I had no agency. It was communicating to me telepathically love and beauty and comfort. And I knew that it was superpositioned. It was both this singular energy that was much larger than me, that was transparent, but it was also speaking for the divine. Like when I was a kid, I saw this Bible with this guy blowing a trumpet, as a drawing in some Bible somewhere, and this really long trumpet, King David or something, and it was like that. It was like the voice of the divine was at the mouthpiece of this extraordinarily long trumpet, and at the end of this bell, the trumpet bell, was this angelic being, which was speaking for the voice of the divine, and yet somehow was also a limited form of it. And I too, so it was superpositioned, both being the ultimate and less than. And I was too. I was inside of this as a light body. I felt my connection to my human body sever like a big pair of scissors, and I was not connected to it anymore. And I was also outside, seeing myself inside and was able to see this entity, this angel being, and was traveling alongside it. And when I would look for it with from inside the angelic being, I couldn't see me seeing me. I
Mm.
was I was seeing myself from the eye of God. It traveled me up to this edge where this large space kind of back in the way that it had come along the same trajectory. And maybe it opened itself or unfolded or I popped out of it and I ended up in this space that was illuminated and dark simultaneously. And it was the size of our universe and there was nothing in it except for me. Vast space. And I was, my light body shape like a human was no, I didn't have that anymore. I was an orb of consciousness and I was gigantic, but I was in this universe sized space. So proportionally, I was small, but I was my thinking, my being, my self identity, my understanding, my knowledge, it was all one thing. I wasn't, it wasn't like a finger and an eyeball, separate things. I was with a brain, no brain, but I knew myself as I have always been and understood that my human form had never really been me, that I'd always been this entity, this consciousness. And I was content in this vast space. There was zero fear. I was in a timelessness and was whole. And I can keep going, or I can give you a little space there to.
It's just so amazing. And I mean, it's awe-inspiring and comforting. And also because I've been a psychic my whole life, I've talked to a lot of dead people. Um, People in all sort of stages of their afterlife. And they all say the same thing basically, but I've never heard it quite like explained the way you are. So it's fascinating.
I came back with this message, and I had to learn to speak about what had happened to me. So I was this orb of consciousness, and this dark space that I was in extended to an edge. And at this edge, which was a universe away from me, but I could see it as clearly as I see you. It, there was it was out of that darkness that a light appeared. The light came out of this darkness and kind of ripped open and appeared before me. And as soon as I saw this gigantic light that was maybe I was the size of the moon and it was the size of the solar system. And I fell in love in an instant, like the most seductive, most beautiful, most attractive, most luscious, most desirous that I'd ever beauty ever seen. And in an instant of my wanting, I was before it. I traveled it, and it moved toward me, and I came to the edge of it, and it was two things at once. It was pure white light, but it was also a, a septillion individual pixels of electromagnetic energy, not just visible light, but all light and much more. And but I could see it all, and they were all. They weren't like switching from the septillion to the one. They were both at the same time. They were in a unitive state, and yet they were many. And out of it was pouring the creator of all there is. And I wanted it, and so I touched it with my being. And as I touched it with my being, it drew me in and ripped me open at the same time. It poured inside of me and inflated me as I entered into it until I became it. And I went through, I tell the story in a sequence but because I have to, that's the only way stories are told, but it was all at once. There was no separation of this thing after the next. And so I was expanded inside this all light, and then there was this eye that appeared to me, and this eye was the uh, sort of a condensing of the divine, but it was, so super bright that it would have burned my eyeballs out if I had them. But it was shining toward me, illuminating me. and showing me myself and speaking to me telepathically that I was beloved and I'd always been beloved, and that all of my life review involved being understanding that for my entirety of my human life, that the divine was me living my life. And as this was going on, I was being told that I was also a creature created. So I wasn't just the light. I was somehow smaller than the light. And that I was a creature, and I understood that this was creator, and I had darkness in my life. And so the darkness in the face of this bright light, I saw the totality of me, and there must have been 99.98% illumination, but there were this, 0.02% that was darkness. And it was the shames that I hid from myself and from others. And as soon as I saw them inside myself, it was like an empty space of darkness. I tried to hide them from the light. And as soon as I tried to hide them from the light, I entered into those darkness. And inside that darkness, I went through a hell of my own creation. And the hell that I went through was all of the wounding that I gave to everyone in my entire life, experienced from their point of view as they experienced it in life. And meanwhile, I was superpositioned and experienced all of the reasons and emotions I had while giving it to them. And it turns out all the pain that I gave them was 10 times greater than the pain that I thought that I was giving them. And I wanted to hurt them. I was like, I was in this, it was like a hell inside of me, and I was giving them a hell. And only the hell that I gave them, that they experienced, their emotions and their biochemical reactions, and all of that accrued to me. It was mine. And I went through a judgment, but the judgment was not, the white bearded guy on the throne. It was the purity of the unlimited love that was making me exist, showing me myself in comparison to itself. And so I judged my own impurity in comparison to this purity that only loved me. And as I was in this state, I could see all of humanity's wounds that we give to each other. Like I could see all people, all at once, and that we were all on a single thin, like almost two-dimensional plane, like the edge of a piece of paper, and all of us were there. The great murderers and genociders, and the holy saints, everybody in between, and we were all the same in comparison to this purity. And so I understood that the structure of the universe itself, for it to exist, has to have this level of brokenness, that it's pervasive not only in humans but in all things that are, and that's not our fault. The voice kept saying to me, I have loved you every moment, even the things that you did that I didn't like. I'm in love with you because I am you, because I am all that there is. And when my ear of my heart turned from myself, from my own shame, and listened to the voice of love, I was shown mercy beyond compare. I became all of my suffering from my life, all the wounds I had given in my life, all the pain that I had experienced was gone, like vaporized, like a Star Trek beam where the object just demolecularizes, and it just didn't exist anymore. And I was infilled with a single thing of love, or beauty, but it was multiple in that it was joy, bliss, paradise, understanding, knowledge, uh, awe, astonishment, mystery, majesty, and they were all truth. They were all one single thing. And I expanded it like a balloon, blew up and bigger. As more of this light poured into me, I became the light itself, till I reached this state of being where I then became, I get to this edge where a drop more of it, I would have no longer existed as an individuated self. I would have been the totality of the beingness itself in light form. And and at that edge, I was shown, became another level where I was like the single pixel of a photon, one photon. And I was entangled with this massive field of photons that were, by this multiples that I Googleplexes, just so many of them, and they were the singular oneness being of the divine, but there were all of these individuated aspects of it, and I was too. I was like a cable connected me to all of those pixels that were all cabled together and this oneness of being. And I'm in this state of union. And as I'm in this state of union, I'm shown another thing. And what I see is at the edge of the darkness, there is a sort of a solid light form that emotes from the darkness in a tubular shape that is also me, only it's below me. And it's for a long time empty of anything. And then as it extends, all these little tiny worlds appear in it. And all of these little tiny worlds, hundreds of them, they're all the lives I had lived before. They're all my incarnations, and they have a sequence to them. There's a chronology, but I'm in timelessness, and they all exist at the same time. And right up to the last life I had just lived. And as I'm looking at this, I'm in this union state of bliss and knowledge. I understand how the structure of the universe is made, how I am made. I understand all this information. And as I look down into this, I think to myself, because I still have an individuated form. I'm still not in the totality somehow. I'm in union with it, but there's still something of me left, but not Peter. This is not about my personality. That was gone. I am an entirely other, higher, truer, original self. And as I see this, I see the oversoul of my incarnated capacity, my incarnating capacity, and all these worlds inside. And I'm like, I want to take a look. And so I get zoomed down into two lives, and I enter the first life, and I am a human being, and I'm walking on this dusty road. I get sandals on. I can see the dirty toenails and the hairy legs, and I get some kind of toga thing on, and I'm in a group with a bunch of guys, and I can hear them talking, and I understand it. And it's this other language, and we're on a major thoroughfare. There are people pushing carts. It's wide, it's dusty, it's hot. There's palm trees. There's a few low buildings, but people are coming and going. It's like we're in between cities or something. And there's a spiritual conversation going on. And I'm kind of in front of the guys, and they ask me a question, and I turn to speak in this other language. And as I begin to speak, I'm out. And I'm like a walk-in in this guy's body. Like I am in this guy's body, and I don't know what happened to him, but I'm my higher self kind of seeing through. And then I'm pulled out, and I'm kind of gone back in time and this chronology, and I'm stuck inside this little tiny world where I was some kind of lizardy thing, where I was frightened. I was hiding in the shadows. I had a very limited intellectual capacity, but I was feeling fear. There was a predator coming to try to eat me, and then I was pulled out again. And and then I I had this experience where I got somehow reduced again. And I had this connection to my just previous life. And I understood that my sister had vanished, and my parents were suffering. And I said, what about my parents? You know, they're going to suffer a whole lot more. And I was swept across this illuminated void. And kind of part of me was stuck out into our universe, where I could see our universe. I could see the greater darkness pouring out the light that was creating our universe and weaving all the light through it. So everything is made of this light, and all these other universes kind of popping out into being birthed by this greater darkness. And all of the size of all of this was aimed like a lens at me. And all of it was made of love, unconditional, infinite love. And that lens of love was aimed at me. And I became the most beloved there ever was. And as this happened, I saw Earth and all the 7 billion at the time people on it. And I saw inside of them the same belovedness inside of me. And that no matter who was who and what they did, there was this golden light inside all that nobody else could see. There was like this fog over Earth, and nobody could see it, but I could see it. And then I saw my parents' lives appear to me, with me living with them and without me living with them. Me dead, me alive. And in me alive, their suffering was less. But in me dead, there was like a nuclear bomb went off in the family. And I said and understood the length of my life, my human life, with the snap of the fingers. And I said, I know this, understand this beauty and peace that I am now. But if I go back there, can I come back here to this beauty and peace? And the voice says, oh yeah, you can come back. And so I figured that it would be a snap of the fingers for me. And so I say, well, then I choose to live my life. And it says, you won't live your life. And it threw me out. And as I went out, I was being carried out by the same light energy. And then there was this beam of light that came out of this darkness that illuminated all of these doorways, a million doorways. And each one of these doorways led right back to my old body, but they were all lives I could live. And in the
Mhm.
center of all of these doorways was this brilliant light that would blind the human being. Uh, and the light kind of got darker as it got to the outer edges, and the voice of God, of the source, of creator, of this angelic intellect said to me, choose light, choose life. And I made this instantaneous choice of the life I would live. And I knew that I had this, that it wanted me to choose the fullness of the light, but I chose a level of broken human of, well, I'm choose the life I'm living, and a kind of a broken person. And I went through this doorway, and as I traveled down this doorway, there were all these other doorways in this tunnel, and all these other doorways led to all these other tunnels, and they were all choices I could make. There's like a big field of probability. And when I got to the end of it, um, there was the body and a guy, shaking the body. And the body was pierced by the hand of the divine energy, and I was stuffed inside this physical form, and I could still see out of this hole in the heart area, and I could see the divine being, and then it just closed, and I was trapped, and the brain came back online, and physical suffering came back instantaneously. Eventually language came back, and I opened my eyes. I could understand what was this guy was screaming and yelling at me, and I looked up at him, and he'd been yelling, "You don't die, don't die, don't die, don't die, don't die." And I opened my eyes, and his shock on his face, he's still saying, "Don't die, don't die, don't die." And I'm looking at him. He's like, "Oh my God, you're alive. I thought you were dead. If you're gonna die, I'm gonna die." And he pulled me back up, and I got readjusted to the world very slowly. And I came back an entirely different person. And when I pulled the rope the first time, it came free, and we descended and treated for hypothermia, and that's as fast as I could tell it. And I left out a whole bunch. Uh,
Wow. Someday, we got plenty of time. I've got plenty of time if you do.
I
And
do.
someday I'll hear the full thing. But wow, that's first of all, wow. And second of all, what was coming back like? And who were you? Who were you that came back?
It was coming back was terrible, and the terribleness of coming back lasted a very long time, decades. It would coming back initially was like I had forgotten what suffering was. So I didn't know suffering. Suffering didn't exist for me. And now, as soon as I'm in this physical body, being in the physical body for me was suffering on a baseline. Just being confined in a form was baseline, not fun.
Yeah.
And plus I had all this pain, I mean, a frostbite, I got bubbles on my fingers, I got frozen toes. And I was all of me didn't come back. I was sort of floating above my body, seeing through my eyes and feeling through my hands. And this was something that lasted in a disorienting way for a very long time. And so I had this depersonalization experience of every moment of my life, including breathing and eating and going to the bathroom. All of it was like totally depersonalized for me,
Mm,
and weird and strange and confining. And I didn't know where I had been. I just knew that it was real and this wasn't. And a lot of the light had come back with me, but I'd lost 99% of it. It was gone. And I had regret. I had anger. I had depression. I almost immediately, within weeks, left on a national theater tour with a college-based theater group, and I isolated myself. I began a long life of isolation because I couldn't understand what had happened to me. I could see light inside of everything, everywhere, all the time. It was like watching if you've got an old slide from picking taking slides or an old film and you shine a light through it, you can see that there's a flashlight and you can see that there's a celluloid film. I could see that there was a flashlight. I could see the celluloid film, and it was very disconcerting. And human beings in particular, I became very permeable to everybody's interior world. Everything they were feeling, I would feel. And it became so confused. That's one of the reasons why I withdrew, because I couldn't tell where I began and other people ended. And so I became isolated in order to preserve myself. And also, I knew that nobody could see what I could see. And I didn't want them to know that I'd become crazy. Because if I talked about this, I couldn't explain it. I didn't have language for it. Um,
I feel that. I spent my whole life that way too, from the not from the mystical, but from the psychic,
oh, it's very ssimilar.
pretty similar. It's just always seeing things other people don't. And for me, it's still that way. For me, like my left eye sees the spirit world and the divine world, and my right eye sees the real world. And so it's like having binocular vision, like where I'm trying to deal with what's happening here, and also this whole other world that other people don't experience.
And
So I
therefore they don't know that it exists.
yeah, yeah. And I spent, I'm just trying to stay out of a mental hospital. I'm just trying to like that's growing
I
up in our generation, where they put you if you saw angels and talked to dead Uncle Fred. When I
That's
was little, I had an experience with a angel, and I was 6. It came into the room like a freight train. It sounded like a freight train or like a hurricane. It was so loud and so huge and so intense, and it was an eye, just the eye.
mm,
It's the eye of God, and
mm.
all this flame and all this fire, and it came in my room. It was like, and I was like hiding under my bed and screaming. Couldn't understand why people thought angels were cute. I'm like, I'm not sure you've ever seen one. Like, but like, because the real thing was, when they'd say like people would fall down and tremble in,
Right. Me too.
in the seeing the real angel. And it said its name was I. It was the eye of God. I don't know. It's a super high level angel, like a cherubim. They don't usually deal with humanity, so I don't know why. I don't know why it was there. But yeah, that's a slice out of and I was 6.
My first mystical experience, I was 5, and then I had one at 6. I think some people are born this way. And who knows? I guess you're going to find out when you get to the other side. But in the meanwhile, it left you marked.
Well, like I also had my near death experience happened when I was in not to me, but I had a twin brother that died in utero, right? So
Uh,
14 weeks, and I remember it clear as day. Like experienced it. And so that's an odd position to be, because I had that full level of consciousness in me, even though I was this wee little zygote
sure.
of 14 weeks or whatever it was. And experience. So I actually knew death before I knew life, and kind of was born with a massive case of the death cooties. That's what I call it. When people have been touched by death or have death lingering on them, it's like that. And so I was born psychic, and that connection I had to my brother like stayed my whole, it's never gone anywhere. So, but it created, I think, the gifts that I've had. So
Hmm.
I came in that way. Like I came in that way
I
for
hear.
for a reason. I really feel like, that was purposeful to give me the gifts that I have so that I could help people.
Whether you like it or not.
Yeah, no choice really.
Yeah.
Just except the assignment. I wasn't even it wasn't even, I always say I just show up and do what I'm told, like that's how it's always been for me.
I'm a
So
follower of the light too, and do what I'm told to the best of my ability.
yeah.
Works out better that way.
Totally. And then you sort of have divine support, divine backing, you know.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow. So it took you a really long time to talk about it. That's right. Like it took you years to start talking about this.
Well, I waited 20 years before I talked about it, and I studied for all of that time. My life changed. I was going to go to graduate school in architecture and work with my dad and my sister in the family firm, and instead, I came back an entirely different person with a different motivation. And so I went to divinity school to study mysticism. Was fortunate to have a dean of students who let me do this 3 year independent study. But I spent the next 20 years practicing Kriya Yoga and centering prayer and deep mystical studies. I became a congregational United Church of Christ minister, hiding out in the church, not a believer, because God had no gender and God had no being and God had no religion and God had no name and the word God didn't exist. It was not any of those things. And so I didn't want to go be committed because that came awfully close once and decided it's best to keep my mouth shut. And so I kept my mouth shut and continued my work and my interior work, my social work, my scholarly work. And I finally, after 20 years, I was serving this church in the town I live in, a resort town on the coast of Maine. I still live there. And there was this huge embezzlement in the church, and it lasted decades. And when I got there, it was a decade old. And then terrible things happened. And the closer we got to the truth, the more people, the powerful people tried to destroy me. And in the end, we won. And in the end, after the criminal was convicted and et cetera, the deacons said to me, you must have had a lot of faith to put up with what we put you through. And I thought, okay, so now finally they trust me. They understand me. They saw what I'm capable of because I was capable of putting up with all the stuff they did to me because of my near-death experience. It gave me this, I got this extra dose of knowing where I'm from and to whom I belong and where I'm going. And so undissuadable, unconvincible.
I feel that. Me too. I've always known what I was for. Never went a day in my life without that feeling.
Exactly. And once you have it, it's a lock-in, and which gave me a ton of courage. It didn't take my problems away, but it gave me a lot of perseverance. And so in the end, when it was all over and the deacons were, and it made the statewide news and it was a big deal. And they said, you must have had a lot of faith to put up with what we did to you. Because they tried to destroy me financially, personally, professionally, defrock me, essentially ruin me. And persevered through all of that. And then I decided the day that they said, you must have a lot of faith. It was just before church. I was like, oh, maybe I can finally come out of the closet and tell them the truth. I don't have any faith at all. I am not really even a Christian. I am not a believer. I am not a believer. I don't believe. I know what I experienced of the divine, and I know that I'm made of light. I know I am an eternal being. I don't believe any of this. It's who I am. And so I told my story from the pulpit for the very first time ever, other than my wife and one of my buddies, a couple of my buddies. And I came out of the closet that day, and then in my town, uh, uh, 5 or 6 other people came up to me in the next week or two. "Oh, we heard that you had died. Me too." Everybody was keeping it a secret because nobody wanted to be accused of being crazy. Um, and and it turns out that all of these people were all compassionate, kind, caring people. That was like their defining characteristics in the town. That's what they were known for. And one owns a fish fry. One was in my office an hour ago. Okay, this is when she's 82 years old. She was in my office an hour ago. And it so changes a person that you can live under the radar. You can keep your mouth shut and wear a mask, which is what I did for 20 years. Um, but I also knew that I was called not to do that. That the whole purpose of my experience was to be a mouthpiece. And so I was being a mouthpiece without ever opening my lips. St. Francis of Assisi said or wrote, preach the gospel at all times, only use words if necessary. And that's how I lived my life, through action, not through telling anybody. But I finally came out of the closet, and I'm encouraging everyone to come out of the closet because we're 5 to 10% of the population, and 45% of the population has other kinds of mystical experiences, visitation from the dead, shared death experiences, all that kind of stuff.
I think it's higher than that.
Well,
Yeah.
it might be higher, but that was just a number that was produced through a research at Pew Charitable Trusts.
I read a Gallup poll when I was researching for one of my books on psychic. I wrote a book about psychic development, and I found this old Gallup poll from the 80s. They had surveyed like 6,000 people from Ohio or something like that, and they found that in this poll, 86% of people had had a psychic experience, and most of them were the deathbed visitation, and 86% of them had never told anyone.
Oh yeah, of course. So that's a better number. I like your number better than the one I have, because I think it's higher too. A study was done by the International Association for Near-Death Studies, published a couple years ago. 60% of grieving people.
Yeah.
Uh, it's a lot. We're a lot. We're many.
To see to have the deathbed visitation, or to have some kind of contact with the person that's crossed over. And I've spent a lot of my time. I always say I'm not a medium, but mediumship happens. Because I do a lot of mediumship work, and have done my whole life. After that's just the nature of my gifts. And um, I think that you know people like us, psychics, mystics, near death experiencers, we're here to. And I went to seminary too. I went to Andover Newton.
You did.
Yeah, but I didn't graduate because I dropped out in my first year because I got divorced and my kids were so little I couldn't be in grad school.
Right.
Um, and yeah, but that I felt the calling as well. So in some alternate one of those doorways and one of those corridors that you talked about, I went to seminary and finished it. But I still feel like I do a lot of ministry work in the work that I do. And I feel like we're here to be that sort of intermediary between divinity, that divine nature, and humanity, for people who haven't had that experience, need the person in between to share so they can understand it, they can experience it through us.
That's what I understand too.
Yeah.
It's my purpose, is to help
Yeah.
people find it inside themselves.
And you've written some books about it.
I've got my story, Heaven is Beautiful, is a memoir of what happened to me and some of what happened afterwards. And it is becoming a film. And I've written 7 other chapters for the movie, flying out to LA coming up in December for a week of meetings.
Wow.
It's my second round of going to LA. It's for real in a way that I can't even imagine could have possibly have happened to me. And then I was on television here in Maine for 15 years. I had a little 2-minute show just before the weather, and now it's time for daily devotions with Reverend Peter Panagore. And so I was the kind of the state's inspirational guy, 2 minutes in the morning, and that became a main bestseller. It's the Orange Book back there, and I'm working on the next book once this movie is underway. My publisher and I have been already talking about it. Um,
What's the next one?
The next one will also be a memoir of because I was started my life as a mystic at the age of 5. My world I've lived a different life than other people. It's going to kind of set up the how I died, and that's going to be part of the movie. And then most of the rest of the book is going to be all the weird stuff that happened after, like all sorts of my ministry. I was the least um ministerial person pretty much any other person had ever met in ministry. I was dealing with embezzlements, murderers, homicides, domestic violence, decapitations, all sorts of terrible, terrible things that I was in the middle of because I could be, because you can't kill me. You can take my body, but I'm unharmable. I came back with this. I came back with a whole lot of gifts. Some of them are psychic, but most of them are practical. And they are gifts like fortitude and dedication and uh, interior journey and connection to the divine and all sorts of stuff. It's
And not afraid of the
Pardon?
dark, not
Pardon?
being afraid of the dark in other people, right? You're
Oh,
so that's why you could do that because you're not afraid of the darkness in other people.
no, I'm not. Because even in the darkest people, I still see the light. And that doesn't mean that I let them be bullies to me or run me over or whatever, or let them get away with what they shouldn't get away with. That's not, I don't hate them because I see the light in them, but I'm not really afraid. It's just,
That's beautiful. So the burning question, Peter, is who is going to play you in the movie, and do you get to choose?
I can't tell you. I know I saw the list and I will tell you this. I saw the list, and when I saw the list, I couldn't believe it. I was like, these are all A-listers, like
Oh,
movies you've seen, movies many people have seen. And I was like, come on, this is for real. And they're like, oh yeah, we can get one of these guys for sure.
I'm pumping for Ryan Gosling.
Well, he's got to be 20.
Oh,
It's got to be a hot young thing, not an older hot thing.
yeah.
But but it doesn't have to be 20. It could be someone who's 30 who can play someone who's 20, but probably not someone who's 45 playing someone who's 20.
Okay.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah, it's pretty amazing. I have to go in a couple of minutes. I got someone coming in, but the my publisher. So I wrote these 7 chapters to create Act 1 and Act 3 because the producer said this is a great book, but it's basically Act 2. We need these other things, and so I worked with them for 3 years, changing my writing voice to fit their need, which is turns out to be the best writing thing that I've ever done.
Cool.
And so when I finally finished these 7 chapters with their approval, chapter by chapter, and the publisher decided to print a special edition of the book at their own expense, 50 copies, called the special edition for the scriptwriter, the producers, the actors, and the studios. And it's being done right now. And so it's unprecedented at that publishing house. As far as I can tell, it's unprecedented in the industry. And so for what that means is that the publisher believes, having vetted the producers and seen my writing and read what we're planning on doing, believes in the project enough to put their money, because publishers are like in business. They're not giving this away. They are
Yeah.
giving it to us, but they expect it to make money on the end, and they expect it to make money because I think it's going to be uh, a really well told story because of my producers and how they've worked on changing my voice. I guess the biggest change in my writing was that I came to understand, and I was an undergraduate English major, so literature has been my life, and writing is my profession. But the plots driven primarily by emotion have more cachet than plots driven by characterization, setting, or anything else. Well, just the idea of the plot. You know, what's the plot of the movie? The plot of the movie is the emotions of the movie. That's the plot. And I coming to that understanding revolutionized my writing. And they beat it into me. It was like I was cold, wet steel, and they kept sticking me in the fire and hammering me on the anvil till I understood. It was a hard process for them and me,
Wow.
but it was really great.
Yeah, that's amazing. I find the editing process quite humbling.
Oh yes, it
But
is.
wow, thank you so much for your time and for your incredible story, Peter. And um, yeah, I look forward to more conversations. I know you have to go, so
Me
um,
too.
yeah, thank you so much for all that you do, all that you are, all that you're, how you're sharing that in the world, and all the ways you're being in the world. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Lisa, for having me on. It's been a pleasure meeting you. Go Minutemen. We both went to the same college.
That's right. We did. Okay.